ये आकाशवाणी है। अब आप वासंती हरिप्रकाश से समाचार सुनेंगे। ये आकाशवाणी नहीं है, रेडियो सिटी 91.1 प्राइवेट एफएम है। और अब आप वासंती हरिप्रकाश से समाचार सुनेंगे। Very unlikely. The second option is happening in at least a few years. Having been a radio practitioner for, let's say, about 6.5 out of 2 decades of a career in media, I'm one of those votaries of radio, thinking and having experienced that, to me, from print, where I started, I began as at the Indian Express desk, then moved on to an editorial because it was a dot-com boom time in the early 2000s. It was a business-to-business portal, India Markets, and mine was to manage the editorial there, on to a private FM, and then on to national news on NDTV, then some documentary work with BBC World News. So this seems like a flaunt card. But the truth, and I will openly plug for radio, because I found that as the most intimate, direct, and impactful way of connecting with that listener, the TG, as the industry calls it. Now, to give ourselves a perspective of where radio is in the midst of this multimedia and digital beast that's unleashed on us, I thought I'd just share a few statistics. I do not claim that this is like the latest data. I have literally, scanned some online data to come from the Acharya called Google. Now, 180 million homes apparently have television sets. We have approximately 800 licensed television stations. The newspaper, the traditional news giver of our times, and historically, the first media, would be 12,300 newspaper titles registered. Now, if we really come to the modern context, we're talking about 462 million internet users, which means to say that in the midst of all this, radio has a very unique advantage. We have actually 3 levels of radio, and pardon me if you already know this. We're just, especially on radio, we're asked to presume the lowest common denominator in terms of awareness of radio. So I'm just going to go through this, which is that we have a state-owned broadcaster, Akashvani, All India Radio. Then we have the private FM radio stations, and that is about 245 commercial radio stations, apparently, as we speak. And this is across 50 cities. Now, if the official count is about 1,600 cities and towns across India, we have about 50 cities. And just early last month, the phase 4 of phase 3 of the radio licensing, the government actually went ahead and gave approval for the e-auction of the third batch, and that would mean 683 radio frequencies in 236 cities. So we are talking about a leap from 50 on to 236, but everything is in the pipeline. Now, as somebody whose official job on Radio City after the print stint I told you about was to be the alarm clock of the city. We had a primetime breakfast show. It was called Good Morning Bangalore, and I used to literally be there at 5:45 in the morning, 7 to 11. It was a live, high energy show on the go. And all one could do, and still can and would be, to play music, to listen to the ads in your own show, try not to tear your hair, and try to put bits of what may get called as news, but is just community updates, what's happening in Bangalore, and you really want to move on beyond a traffic format. You want to be a jam buster. You want to just be telling, okay, there's somebody who needs blood. But is this what the humongous potential of radio is to be used for in our country? What is the need at the moment? And let's look at this snazzy television big bro. Who is the victim or the trendsetter of studio journalismization? Just taking a license to coin that. Because somehow, fortunately, I was in the cusp of real reporters on the ground feeding into primetime news bulletins to just some 8 boxes taking over national news agenda. Now, if we think that radio, which has served national interests, which has so many cultural, musical, sociological, whatever contexts across the country, and we are going to let radio only occupy this space because the government feels that we are not equipped to handle the security risk or the sensitivity risk, how does it even hold water? What about television then? What about the other media then? What kind, I mean, how does radio become this very special entity? Because if you're talking about the Northeast, if you're talking about Kashmir, all the border areas, you want to be able to regulate news, go on, fine. We understand there's a security interest and angle. But what can be, why can't that logic be applied onto radio? And in the comparison of this thing, this huge digital space called internet. Now, the second point I want to move on to is the voices. I mean, if as journalists we were told that we are to be the voice of the voiceless, is television serving that need? Print, yes, to a large extent, one could say, but even then we are talking about print owned by corporate interests, just as television is owned by its own corporate masters. One doesn't, I mean, obviously, if you're going to talk about bringing news onto radio, it might suffer from the same ills. I don't deny that. But to have models of radio that could actually serve this need of the, I don't know, 1+ billion voices, even a millionth or a fraction of which does not get covered by the media. I was telling you about the 3 models. One is, of course, the official broadcaster, Akashvani, then the private FM, and the third and very, very important one, again, heavily underused, is a community radio. Now, community radio technically was given permission by the government and, in the first phase to educational institutions and a certain select bodies to run community radio, and by the very virtue of its name is supposed to serve the interests of a community. It could be farmers in Mewar, it could be a group of women in Pastapur in Medak, Andhra, as it happens in Telangana, or all these radio stations, but their range is 12 kilometers. If you actually talk to a community radio practitioner, they would tell you that because there are restrictions in even who you can buy your transaction equipment from, which are government regulated again, many of them don't even cross the 9-kilometer radius. Not very far from where we are. We are in MG Road, and probably just about 2.5 kilometers from here is a community radio station called Radioactive. Have you heard of this? And we are journalists. I'll tell you why we have not heard of it. Now, that community radio station has the country's first transgender RJ. It has a show that is put together by Waste Pick, one show which is exclusively produced, presented by Waste Pickers. They even have a name, Kasa Shramika Parisara Rakshaka. Avara ಹೆಸರನ್ನ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ this is a show where the stakeholder is the person whose need is to be served. It's not some la-di-da radio anchor coming and telling you, you know what, this is what we should be doing for garbage and this is what will serve the community. No, this is a show presented by those communities themselves. There's a show that is put together by parents of differently able children. There is a show on mental health. None of this is reflected as a concern of the city that we live in by any of the big players of radio, including the one that I used to work at. And if you look at the ownership patterns of the radio stations, Mirchi, Times of India, uh, Radio 1 by the India Today Group, and City, initially owned by Star. So you understand that there are agendas, and of course, Mahesh also touched on some of the statistics and profit. Well, fair enough. But what happens at the end of the day to the person, to the citizen, and where is it need being served of what it, how is it even legit to call itself a media, therefore? To just draw your attention, radio, the case that radio is a powerful medium in itself doesn't need any further validation. But apparently there are 44,000 radio stations worldwide, the UNICEF says in its data. And 75% of households in developing countries have access to radio. The scenario is not very different in our country. And we already shared statistics on what kind of, television sets owning houses are there, as opposed to newspapers, and how many have access to the radio sets. Now, how does one therefore take this one step ahead? And I used to feel very strongly about it even when I was on radio, because, this is 2008, let's say, and I didn't even know any sort of route to get this point across to a higher thing. But somehow we used to just discussing how lovely it would be if we would be able to do this. At one stage, I just got called to a media or a global forum at Salzburg, and I got this opportunity. I thought I shouldn't let this go. And at Salzburg, I presented, because I was anyway on private FM radio, I said, okay, this is an Indian radio scenario, whether it's community radio, and this we are again talking of 10-year-old data. And I remember people from Nepal and Sri Lanka telling me that, of course, they also have their restrictions, etc. But to the kind of things that they're able to put out on their own radio stations that are directly useful to their listeners. And that's way beyond only music and celebrity talk. Which therefore, when Georgie reached out and, this topic, I said, okay, this is so fabulous, because one can probably, it's almost like, co-opting a whole room full of media friends to say that, okay, can we all just put out maybe a petition or something if you all feel strongly about it. So I actually spoke to a legal friend of mine. I said, one thing is it for all of us strongly to feel that, yeah, radio is a medium. Who hasn't heard of radio? I'm not even going into a survey in this room, but let's say even the voices from Amin Sayani Sahab to Mark Tully on BBC Radio. In fact, Mr. Tully once wrote about this when he was interacting with students in Delhi and said that, okay, what do you all think about television? What do you all? And apparently the student said, radio, no potential. Television has killed it. To which he said that that's because that there is this monopoly on the radio waves in India. Now, if only you were to open up the kind of possibilities, the kind of media, and as I was mentioning to you, the kind of voices. I'll come back to what my legal friend told me. But I also want to present to you another model of radio that I have been closely involved with, which is in Chhattisgarh. It's a tribal radio network. Some of you know Shubhranshu Chaudhary. So Shubhranshu was a former producer with BBC Hindi. He got back to Raipur. He set up something called the CG Net Swara, Chhattisgarh Net Swara, because he has written extensively on how it doesn't serve the purpose at all, any mainstream media, particularly radio, and about 80 million tribal population. To quickly tell you the story of this before we open it up to Q&A possibly, is that he developed a radio model which operates on a missed call model, which means, along with the MIT, it was developed. So if, let's say, you are in Bastar, you are somewhere in a tribal dwelling, you of course have no access otherwise to any sort of media, but you have network, let's say, the model number 1. It allows you to give a missed call to a certain number. The moment that number, it's a missed call. So therefore the number calls you back. You aap kripya ek dabaye, acha aapne dabaya, and in Gondi Bhasha, the local dialect. And the moment you press it 1, it allows you to record whether you're talking about your own basti कि यहाँ पर रास्ते नहीं बने, यहाँ पर बिजली नहीं आई है, or any of that, and or even record a Chhattisgarhi folk song, anything at all on that set of yours. If you and I, whether we are sitting in Banashankari or Boston, want to listen to that, it is possible through that radio format because again it's a server triggered radio network. So you and I will call the same number and this time press 2 to hear what is the news of the day. And that way, those of us who are interested in news of the heartland, whether we are journalists or not, have access to news from our own country of a section that none of the big boys of radio or television will touch with a barge pole. So this is a model that has been operational and classic story, shortage of funds. But now he has come up with a refined this thing called Bull 2 radio. And what is Bull 2 and why Bull 2? Because he saw a bunch of children fidgeting with their mobiles in a tribal dwelling in Madhya Pradesh. And these kids were listening to some songs on their mobile phones. And apparently, she was telling me, saying that I was just wondering, how is it even? Because there's no Wi-Fi, like how we urban creatures are used to, and what are they actually doing? And they apparently told him in their dialect, saying that, sir, the Bull 2 hai. Turns out it was Bluetooth. So he said that, okay, why not create downloadable radio format? It could be about your crop pattern. It could be about great things happening, whether you want to put out your goods on an e-commerce platform. But to have this downloadable radio formats. And then, of course, the revenue model, hopefully, if it's refined, will be at a certain charge. So therefore, a country like ours has developed its own robust radio models apart from what the pioneers of the radio space like UK or others have given us. The only thing is the necessity to open our radio waves. I will end on the note that when I actually asked my friend, saying, so how do we take this cause forward? Not candlelight marches, but what can get the government's attention on it? So he was like, Vasanthi, actually, I would tell you that the legal route, of course, is there. In fact, I was looking up online. There's been a Mumbai NGO that actually petitioned the government and saying, how can you have these curbs in policy? It goes against Article 19 of freedom of right to expression. So the courts did hear this. But there was just one concession made at that time, that initially what we saw as, okay, it's only Akashvani that can put out news, as you know. But now it's said that, well, if you're a private FM radio station, you're also now eligible to take content from not just Akashvani, but also private television and any other digital space. So that is the only concession that we have moved a little bit this far. He said that you're actually better off, probably, having a lot of debate around it and having a lot of public awareness about what we are missing out on, because I constantly tell them about these, this sort of voices that get left out rather than included. And that's been my main angst ever since I had the terrific fortune to experience radio as a, presenter. And so he said that you are really, once you do that, and probably engage with the government and don't give it up, and probably collect more and more people to the cause. And I would think that a gathering like this could be a great start for that. Thanks.
This CG Net Swara, which you spoke about, it works on the missed call model.
Yeah.
And what is its reach? I am very interested in, because I grew up in Chhattisgarh. Then it was Madhya Pradesh, but
right.
The area where I grew up was Chhattisgarh.
See, officially the CG Net Swara model statistics, as any radio broadcaster, usually they are very cagey about statistics, but in this case it's Shubhranshu, so one can easily ask him that. But I know that in terms of the states that it covers, because I don't know the number of users, if you are talking about, let's say, specific numbers, I don't have, and I don't think he had when we asked him. Having said that, it covers, because it's as much, the server, by the way, for that was in Bangalore, and that's how I got a story peg when I actually did a story on it in 2009. It serves Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, parts of Telangana, Odisha, the evolved one. The CG Net Swara, by virtue of its own name, was across the Bastar and Narayanpur, some of the districts, but I'm sorry, I don't have it. We can always find out.
Not northern Chhattisgarh?
I wouldn't know. I will probably. It's a matter of
Bastar is south, and
yeah, yeah. But it's a. I don't know which are the actual districts now covered under that. But he's a phone call away. By the time this ends, we can get you the data.
so okay.
Yeah. But the thing is that also the challenges. One is that the missed call model has many subscribers. They have a Facebook page. It's called CG Net Swara. They have many subscribers, which may not really equal some Twitter following or something, but it's got the dedicated, let's say, listener base of people across geographies across the world. And in fact, gained international attention because um, I think he beat Snowden to get the digital journalism award about 3 years back. So it's more famous in certain places than in our own country, and that itself speaks about the reach and the challenges that any limited model of radio has, unless it gets big patronage.
Reasons why the government is still hesitant is because, unlike TV, which will require a plug-in point somewhere, radio is very much more portable. So the portability is what stands against its use, or rather the abuse that they fear, which is why news, they don't want to let FM radio have it freely, the private sector, because that is what their explanation is. My question, therefore, is to beat that, if the radio goes on the internet, that takes care of that problem.
No, but internet radio is already there, John.
Yeah, it's already there.
Yeah.
So if that is there, then why worry about
No.
FM radio?
See, the way internet radio works and the way FM radio works, even in the way of let's say perception. Now, see, if I am trying to make a point, I mean, I absolutely valid your question. I'm saying that we are trying to talk about a radio space that is more democratic, it's more inclusive of voices. And internet radio again cuts the purpose of access. Though you have technically as what, some 460 internet users, etc. But we are talking about a radio set and something that can be streamed through your own, mobile phone. And as far as this thing of fear of being misused is concerned, see, ultimately the ownership of radio that you're giving, you're going to know the owner. You know what I'm saying? Now, even if you, let's say, if there's a scenario, if you really as a government you're afraid about foreign ownership or something, I think it's capped at around 26%. So technically, the other majority partner in this would be somebody, an Indian, on whom you anyway have a hold. So it will basically be the same thing, as much as you have a hold or this self censorship and regulation we call among the mainstream media channels. I mean, I don't see a case why this is any different, and if so, it can be addressed.
Streaming can be done from your own shack at home, and you can put it on the internet and get it going. You just need a system. Compared to the airwaves, it's like our government, because of its laws, technically, if you sit inside an aircraft and take a picture of the aerodrome, you're violating the law. Every culvert in this country is covered under security laws where you're not supposed to take a picture. So, we had this morning session where we had someone talking about new media, I mean the internet. Everybody can be an internet journalist, and this day and age, you can broadcast news through the internet, and the availability of smartphones and internet connectivity is so high, and it's rising. With Geo, it's made it absolutely available to everybody free.
No, I agree with you. I mean, see, what the government is trying to curb on radio, internet will make all that redundant because, well, it is quite a beast, and what control do we have over it? But still, the point will come back to what we can put, the potential of all that can be put on radio. No one's really debating on, whether the internet can, but see, ultimately the access to a radio set and a radio show, as you and I go across the city and our, places or sit at home and listen, is very different from tuning into an internet radio station. So the logic by which the government is right now not allowing private news on FM radio while everything else is thriving seems absurd at this time, which is what is to be challenged. Otherwise, see, I know in terms of, the intention of putting those things in place, one understands. But we are just saying that, listen, this is a scenario in which we are operating. Then what is the logic in just holding back radio? And on the other hand, if you were to open it up, these are the good things that could happen, and this is the immense potential. And especially the voice. In fact, the Hindu carried a piece on one of these, the community radio station that I was talking about. And Pinky Chandran, who heads the, who's the station head at Community Radioactive, she said that they were having a slum workshop in Bangalore somewhere. And after that, it was just a workshop, not even a radio program. But she just took out her mobile phone and she said, okay, it's been a lovely workshop. Maybe we should get some of these voices on radio. And she just put the phone to a woman next to her from the slum, who were all, discussing. And she said that, okay, so what is your take, or what should the city get, or some such thing. And she just this thing, and this woman was absolutely dumbstruck. And she said, do you want to actually take my voice? I said, yeah. But really, I mean, my thing on radio. And she said that, Pinky, I remember, said that, I thought I've said something wrong. And she said that she had tears in her eyes because she said that I have never been asked what I want. And that, for me, that's a distilled thing, a case of why we need more voices. Therefore, because somehow television is not doing that for us at all. Increasing takeover of pundits and experts who kind of pontificate and tell you that this is the perspective we should be having. We never get to hear voices from the ground. And as a reporter carrying a mic and putting it on your face for a sound bite, there's no guarantee that it's making it into the show that matters, which is heard by decision makers. Maybe with radio we have a greater chance.
You spoke about three tiers of radio, and at the top one we have All India Radio, then we have FM and the community one. So I think you may have touched upon it when you answered this last question, but if news were to be allowed in radio, in what direction would community radio develop in India to make ours a more inclusive democracy? What are the innovations likely to happen there? Could you just hazard a guess?
Uh, the innovations as we speak are already happening, a couple of which I mentioned. But I think, see, it will be a big deal for community radio, at least in some sense, puts out, let's say, what could get classified as news, because they are putting out community updates. The bigger thing, challenge right now is the private FM stations, which can't move beyond inane Bollywood or the regional music formats. Having said that, I think once you allow news to happen, we have the talk radio, for example, is always this often quoted thing about NPR in the US, saying why can't we have talk shows in India? What has happened is that in the initial phase of radio itself, privatization of FM radio in India, we have got the audiences used to radio has to be only about music. To give you an example, yesterday there was this little talk by Mr. Uday Vijayan, who heads the country's first citizen initiative for fire safety. Yesterday, to the day 8 years back, we saw one of the most tragic fire incidents at Carlton. I think there were about 9 lives lost. And so I saw the radio presenter interviewing Mr. Vijayan and saying, okay, we talk to him, we find out what this is about. And how did this come about, sir? So he said, well, I lost my only son and this is how it is. And then he said, what exactly is Beyond Carlton all about and how does it propose to make Bangalore fire safe? We will come back and tell you. Believe it or not, I waited for 26 minutes to hear him next through ads and music and promos and his own, jingle, etc. By which time I've forgotten what Mr. Vijayan said in the first place there. But at the same time, having been in that place, except that we were in a slightly better off position because the radio station I used to work for had a monopoly. So as a rule, if you were in Bangalore, you were my captive audience. So what actually this terribly limiting format of radio will first of all open up the moment you make way for news on that, because it's impossible to carry on with the same format. What gets called as is rundown, and technically you speak about this programming language. It will allow you more space to be able to make a point, and if you're presenting a news and particularly perspectives and hopefully get voices onto it, then that itself for me, it may seem silly to call it innovation, but it will be freedom, liberation for that poor thing called radio in our country. Just to take off to what you asked about community radio, particularly, there are some which are so unique, even in their radio models. In Pastapur, which I barely mentioned in my talk, in Medak district, I traveled to that place about 6 years back to find a beautiful model of radio run by only women who happen to be Dalits. And it was so, even the concept, in fact, they had a they had a birthday call-in program. On the day I went, she just said, "Ikkada kuchandi," I just had to, I was a fly on the wall kind of thing. And the kind of things that people were asking for across the district to this woman was not some Sonu Nigam or, SPB kind of song. They were making a request for their own, Telangana folk songs and things like these, which play a very significant part in keeping the culture and tradition of that region alive without any the moment a big player will come onto this thing, you can automatically by, default setting, it will have this thing, this music, this time, high rotation songs, hit songs, etc., completely killing the local music. So I personally feel that the innovation in format, of course, we have seen with the Chhattisgarh model, but innovation in content, even including those in Mewar, and there's something called Gurgaon Ki Awaaz. I'm part of a community radio network across the country, and there in Gurgaon Ki Awaaz, the healthcare thing, because it caters to a section of people, whereas you and I hear only about the biggies of Gurugram, whereas here we are talking about literally the place, this thing, and it's become so popular, and it's giving a sort of competition to the local radio network in terms of its listenership. So yeah, I just hope that there are more radio votaries. Thanks so much. Namaskara.